If you're one of the 2 million people each year who seek recovery from drug or alcohol addiction in the United States, you'll probably be pointed towards either Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous by the U.S. court system, your treatment center, your therapist, or your doctor. AA and NA are the two oldest 12-step recovery fellowships, and millions of people have benefited from AA co-founder Bill Wilson's spiritual experience. But probably just as many people have been put off by the 12-step assertion that a higher power, or God, is necessary for recovery. At best, God is optional. At worst, the God idea locks a lot of people out of recovery. I don't say this as an atheist or an anti-religious person. I say it as someone who has worked with a few hundred people using AA's big book whose recovery was held up or short-circuited because of this topic. In my own case, I hitched a ride to my first 12-step meeting with my mom, who was on her way to an Al-Anon meeting where there was also an AA meeting. I had a desire to stop drinking, which incidentally is the only requirement for membership in 12-step fellowships, a desire to stop. But the idea that a super being would fix me left me wondering whether suicide might be a better option. Some people choose the sky, birds, nature, the universe, etc. as their higher power. I remained unconvinced that an inanimate object had much to do with whether or not I'd stop destroying myself. After a couple of years of trying and not succeeding, I went to treatment and then went back to the rooms. The treatment center I attended claimed to be 12-step based, but aside from guest speakers who came in and told their stories, no one ever discussed the steps or explained the process. My discharge summary from treatment also included the recommendation that I attend 12-step meetings. I'd been around 12 steps since I'd been about 13 years old, first with Alateen, then hitching a ride to my first AA meeting in my early 30s, then listening to 12-step speakers while in rehab. I knew what AA and NA were, but knew next to nothing of the 12-step program. But enough about me for the moment. Despite 12 steps quasi-religious language and the echoes of Christianity in 12-step recovery, it's not difficult to accomplish recovery as an agnostic or atheist, as long as you stick to the information presented in the original source material, AA's Big Book. What was written versus what gets repeated endlessly in AA and NA meetings, that's where the problems begin. It's also easy to dismiss 12 steps today when we know there are other paths, but most people seeking recovery will end up in 12-step fellowships, and they comprise the largest groups and highest memberships among all recovery approaches, so not dismissing them is useful. The idea that God is required to recover may seem ridiculous today, but when the steps were written, it made sense. Bill Wilson's assertion that belief in the power of God is essential for recovery sprung from a convergence of his personal experience, the way he was introduced to recovery, and the era in which he was raised. First, Wilson was raised by his grandparents in New England, a region known for its religious adherence. His grandfather believed in God, and while he questioned some people's right to tell others how to practice their faith, he never claimed God wasn't real. Wilson would later say much for himself in recalling his childhood. Quote, "I had always believed in a power greater than myself," he wrote. "I had often pondered these things. I was not an atheist." Second, at the end of his active addiction, when Wilson had basically given up and consigned himself to dying of alcoholism, an old friend, Ebby Thatcher, who Wilson saw as a worse drunk than himself, stopped by Wilson's apartment. And Thatcher was sober. He told Wilson of a, quote, "simple religious idea and a practical program of action," unquote, that could be his salvation. So God was the first idea Wilson was presented with that promised relief. And third, when Alcoholics Anonymous was founded, over 70% of the population in the U.S. regularly attended church at a time when there was no known solution to alcoholism or drug addiction. Sort of like, without any other options and most people going to church, why not God? But do the math. If about half the original members were agnostic or atheist when church attendance was over 70%, how many are agnostic or atheist today when church attendance is below 50%? A lot more than half is a safe bet. Can they navigate the program of AA without God or higher power? They sure can. Pushback to the God idea was present from the very start. Despite Wilson's claim of God's centrality to recovery, AA boasted a sizable agnostic and atheist membership right out of the gate. In AA's primary text, Bill Wilson tells us about half, as I mentioned before, of the original members were one or the other. One such non-believer, Jim Burwell, went so far as to insist on the addition of the phrases that we know so well today: God as we understood him, and higher power. Burwell's suggestion to add as we understood him and higher power proved useful and opened the door to many skeptics, but it's also led to some ridiculous claims since then. Your higher power can be a chair is one example. And even when the non-believing member is willing to come up with some imagined higher power, the mental gymnastics necessary are sometimes extraordinary. Those who find the whole exercise too much tend to give up, maybe to seek another recovery path, or maybe to go back to active addiction. In a time when hundreds of thousands of people die of addiction in the U.S. each year, it's worth taking a look at 12-step recovery on its own terms to see whether God is as essential as the author and some people today believe it to be. This podcast series will walk through the process with special attention to portions of the Big Book text that are often overlooked or not taken in the manner they may have been intended. We hope to show that recovery in a 12-step fellowship is not dependent on the belief in any supernatural or higher power, and can be accomplished simply by doing the work outlined in the text. I hope you can join us for that journey.